Orolunga. Orolunga is a very pivotal place for your players in this campaign, as they will meet a Naga who could potentially spill the beans on the location of Omu. How your players actually find Orolunga is petered out in multiple ways throughout this campaign. There are several guides who theoretically will lead the players to there. There are some rumors that lead to there, and perhaps they possibly go to Umbala and see the ziggurat from there. Unfortunately, much like some of the other places, this was just shy of getting its own map, but there is a pretty decent amount of detail put into it. Orolunga is essentially this ziggurat that is magically protected, and your players will have to go through a series of trials in order to climb to the very top and eventually meet with the Naga that is in charge. The first set of steps, they'll be going against some basically thorns that will hurt them if they attempt to walk across. However, this can be circumvented if they emulate the Chewinga, as basically every step along the way of this little puzzle, they can emulate Chewingas that they look around and see making their way up the ziggurat. It notes that basically you can't try and magic your way out of this, as you can't fly trying to get over the steps of the ziggurat. You simply have to go either headlong and take a whole bunch of damage, or emulate the Chewinga. The second set of steps involves them climbing over basically broken bits of the ziggurat, and no matter how hard they try, they won't make any headway unless they emulate the Chewinga. Pretty simple stuff. And last but certainly not least, the third set of steps. The third set of steps are a little bit dangerous, as they can theoretically go up against infinite swarms of poisonous snakes. Depending on the level of your party, this will be, either not hazardous at all, or, potentially deadly. But that in itself is not the issue of just going up against these swarms of snakes. In order for them to make it into the very top, they're going to have to grab one of the snakes and swallow it. This is obviously disgusting, but totally awesome. If your players have phobias of snakes and swallowing live creatures, this is for sure an easy way to freak them out. And if you have players with deathly phobias, I suggest probably changing it to something else. But if you don't, there's a little table here that shows off that they basically need to make a Constitution saving throw, or else they'll start taking psychic damage. And that psychic damage is rather deadly. It's 5d6 psychic. Oof. And also important is it's not just a flat DC check that they can attempt over and over. It actually scales more and more the more they do it. So if you have players that are unconstitutional or incredibly unlucky, they will find themselves soft locked out of mating with the Naga in charge. Lastly, here in the bit of Orolunga, it details Saja and Baz's shrine. As soon as the characters walk into the very top of the ziggurat, they'll find themselves in a room that has clearly stood the test of time and is beautiful. Inside, they will find the Guardian Naga. The Spirit Naga is very pleasant and is willing to give the characters some good information on finding Omu and Raznisi's rise to power and all that fun stuff. It also recommends here as well that Artis Cimber and Dragonbait can be found here, where Artis Cimber will be asking about his wife. Might be a great way to throw it in there. It actually says too that Saja and Baza really, really, really wants Raznisi killed to punish him for all the evil deeds that he'd done. So much so that Saja and Baza will actually cast a Gesh spell on the characters to basically make them do it. The Guardian Naga itself is, as stated, a lawful good character. It does seem a little bit, too hardcore to cast a Gesh spell saying, hey, do this for me. But you must understand, Raznisi did jack up a lot of the jungle, and and this Guardian Naga wants that finished. What's also interesting is this is not a recurring thing that your players can go to. They cannot keep on going up the shrine and asking Sajin and Basil a whole bunch of questions. And also important, if any guides came, the guides wouldn't come. Because once the characters leave the shrine, they'll turn around and see that they can never go there ever again. The place basically disappears for them. So everyone that ever meets the Guardian of Orolunga will only ever meet them once. Pretty interesting stuff here. You can certainly throw in some really useful information to your players here. But I will also say you probably don't want them sitting here asking 50 questions. You might have to cap it to some degree, maybe give only each of them one, two, or three questions that they're allowed to ask. And also important to note that this Spirit Naga is not all knowing. There's only a limit to what they know. So be sure to keep in mind what your players might be thinking of asking when they arrive in order to have a solid answer for them. Port Castigliar. Port Castigliar is once again another place totally ruined, only a paragraph of information. It says here that it basically was a depot with a couple of huts and a graveyard. However, the graveyard's been defiled and the place has been overran. Ghouls dug up the bodies and have been using them for whatever purposes. Not really too much going on here, but you can certainly have it as sort of like a mini staging area for further use into the jungles. Refuge Bay. Refuge Bay is one of the many places your players can make landfall into the jungles from ships. And it actually says in this little paragraph that many explorations into the jungle have started from here because the sandy white beaches are gorgeous to look at. It also encapsulates Ishao, which used to be a city, but the spell plague basically buried it. So players making their way to Refuge Bay might see that a couple of buildings are sticking up out of the water, or the guides might tell them, "Oh, hey, there used to be a city here." Once again, nothing too much, just a little paragraph of flavored text and nothing more. River Olung. The River Olung runs from the Kitcher's Inlet all the way down to Lake Luo. Nothing really too much going on here, other than it is a good way for your players to get relatively deep into the jungle going by a river, as going by some of the other rivers might get them not as far as they want to south. So pretty interesting stuff. River Soshenstar. The River Soshenstar is more likely one of the most popular routes into the jungle itself by canoe, as they will undoubtedly hear some information about the camps that lie along its banks, and they'll also probably get a couple of quests involving areas around there, as well as it's just a really great way to head south into the jungles and make it pretty freaking far. Really not much to say other than your players, depending on how often they go into the jungles, will probably find themselves going down this thing a handful of times. River Tiryki. River Tiryki is the other most frequented river that takes the parties down south. However, after a point, it ends. It actually ends in a gorge, which, funnily enough, the Grung population of Dungrung Lung actually look out over. In addition to that, there's also a firefinger near the banks of it, meaning that the Terrafolk regularly stock the rivers, making this river the most dangerous of all of them in Chult. It doesn't actually say that they get different random encounters here, but I personally would spice it up a little bit, maybe have some more wild things going on here than some of the other rivers. Shilku. Shilku is a small abandoned coastal village that lies on Shilku Bay. Shilku, the settlement, is almost landlocked by the ocean and the mountains that reside around it. Interesting enough, the location is one of the places Commander Liara Porter actually wants investigated and is willing to pay the players for, as having a base down south, a little staging area to go into the jungles, could be productive. However, once your players arrive, they find the place has been pretty much abandoned by any Chultans of any kind, There are Mephids, Fire Newts, and Salamanders that could be found here, though. No maps are provided, but it's just another ruinous area where some random encounters with Mephids, Fire Newts, Salamanders, and other various heat-loving creatures could be found. It is a very good staging area for your players if they do want to renovate the place and make some journeys there. Shilku Bay. Shilku Bay, not much to say about it other than it is another bay that is located relatively close to a volcano. While not dead, there is some ashes that sprinkle down above. It does state that ships coming into Shilku Bay have a chance of losing their sails and much more as red hot coals spew out from the nearby volcanoes. There's not actually any mechanics behind that, but you can have some fun. You can have either dexterity saves or piloting checks to see if your captains can avoid the terrifying ordeal of having a ship burn around them. Snapping Turtle Bay. Snapping Turtle Bay is interesting as it is probably the most unused asset in all of this adventure, as it is very far south and very far away from where the adventure actually takes place. But the location itself is very interesting, as the beaches are patrolled by a clan of cyclopses that are not inherently dangerous to the party. They are curious, but not inherently hostile. They simply live and just go about their business. It says that they can even be hired as guides and as bearers if you make friends with them, which could lead to some very interesting ordeals. As having some Cyclop friends really makes your group's power rating kind of inflate heavily. Also interesting to note here is that there are giant snapping turtles that prowl the beaches, but one of them in particular is a named one, King Toba. King Toba glitters as it is a basically its shell is encrusted with a whole bunch of gems. It says that the shell grants it protection from saving throws and other various effects, which makes it a little bit dangerous. As 120 hit points and giant snapping turtles, they can be dangerous. They can bite real hard, but the result is worth it as they can find after killing this thing 60 crystals that go for 10 gold each. According to my quick math, that's a decent haul for just killing one creature. So how would the players actually come to find out about King Toba? Maybe there's some rumor somewhere that, oh hey, in Port Nanzaru someone was passing by Snapping Turtle Bay, got freaked out by the Cyclopses, and on their way out they saw this turtle that was hurting their eyes because it was glowing so much. You can have some interesting rumors that can guide the players here. However, as previously stated, this place is pretty far away from the adventure, and hopefully you're not drawing your players too far away from where the true action is lying. Snout of Omgar. The Snout of Omgar is just an island, a mountainous peninsula that was broken off during the Spell Plague. They consider this the boundary between Chult and Samarak, which I will go ahead and say, the map only stretches so far. I would definitely tell your players to, they probably shouldn't go, below south of the Samarak Mountains, as there's nothing here. The adventure's not here. Don't waste your players' time, and don't waste your time going further south than they need to. Valley of Dread. Valley of Dread is the location that lies to the east of the Peak of Flames and is just jungle and jungle and jungle. As you can see on the map here, there is no locations, there is no settlements, there is nothing to be noted because the place just it doesn't belong in the adventure really. Your players should not be directed to go to the Valley of Dread. They shouldn't be traipsing around here for too long. It being labeled the Valley of Dread is sort of an homage to an older module from, in fact, the earliest edition of D&D called Isle of Dread. There isn't too much reference other than that the place is home to lizard folk and various little kingdoms of monsters. But the Valley of Dread is much like other places. Like it shouldn't. I would recommend that you don't send your players here unless you're willing to come up with some really fun stuff because this adventure already has so much going on for it. You don't really need to send your players to a place where you're having to come up with everything on the spot. You shouldn't have to send your players to a place where you're coming up with, the adventure for them. Valley of Lost Honor. The Valley of Lost Honor is located just outside Hrakamar and stretches very far. The only inhabitants of the Valley of Lost Honor are heat-related creatures such as the fire newts of Hrakamar and Tinder of Wyrmheart Mine. It says that the dragon is going to form a pack with the salamanders, as they both seem to gain a benefit from it. The dragon will have more control and power, and the salamanders will get a new iron deposit. Not really too much to say about Valley of Lost Honor. It's just more barrenous wasteland where only he-related creatures may reside. It is out in the open though, so you can certainly have some fun encounters. I personally have killed a player or two out in the open because the red dragon spotted them. Uh, but it's a good way to it's a good fast way for your players to hop through Shilku Bay, make their way to the Valley of Lost Honor, and then head to Omu if they know where Omu is located. Vorn. Vorn is the location of a Shield Guardian because in every single 5th edition module there has to be a Shield Guardian hidden around somewhere for your players to somehow gain control of. This one is actually pretty, ham-fisted to you. You're given the location of Vorn pretty early on if you talk to the merchant prince Wakanga Otomu. He basically wants this thing and gives the players the location of it as well as the promise of a reward. Vorn is standing around doing nothing, however, it's inactive. Surrounding Vorn is a series of offerings, and what your players can actually come to find is that there are multiple tribes of various small humanoids that are essentially worshiping this thing. A combination of grung, veggie pygmy, and batiri. Your players will end up searching around, and they can actually find that some of these tracks lead to one of the other named locations, Yellyark. So it goes into detail about the fact that surrounding Vorn is essentially a peace area for these three tribes, which implies that maybe they're doing conflict somewhere else. But what's sad is it doesn't actually go into any detail about any of the surrounding Grung or Veggie Pygmy tribes. It does go into detail about the Batiri tribe later on, as your players can actually, with a little bit of survival, they can find the track leading to the settlement of Yellyark, where they will find themselves a really fun encounter. Vorn is a series of contentions from a lot of different groups. A lot of DMs love giving their players a Shield Guardian. A lot of DMs hate giving their players Shield Guardians. So how do you interact with this? Well, I mean, you can only decide what's best for your group. Vorn on paper is absolutely disgustingly powerful, especially because they can get Vorn theoretically so early. Shield Guardians natively are just insanely powerful. They can store spells, they can be carrying your gear, they do done damage in combat, they regenerate, they can tank, they can, lift things up. They can solve a lot of problems just by having them. So what do you do? For me, I essentially see it as one of three ways. Either one, your players immediately when they get access to Vorn and they make their way back to Port Nyanzaru, well, Konga just takes it. No questions asked. He just takes it. But he does offer the players a really good reward. Two, have at it. Let him have Vorn and, see the awesome, crazy things that Vorn gets up to in the jungles. Three, however, if you want to go down the route of letting them have Vorn but don't like how powerful Shield Guardians are, give Vorn a nerf. If you want your players to have a Shield Guardian but not have it be overpowered, then I'd recommend maybe looking into replacing it from a shield guardian. Maybe make it something that's much weaker. Maybe make it something that can die. Maybe if you want to just nerf the shield guardian as is, you remove one of its arms and its regeneration ability. Maybe you make it a smaller construct. There's a lot of fun things you can do to make Vorn a part of the group, but not overshadow the players in any way. I will say overall, my groups, every single one of them has been very forthcoming and just willingly given up Vorn. I haven't had to resort to anything. It does state that Wakanga really wants this thing, and while Wakanga Otomu is a good guy, he really wants this Shield Guardian. So it wouldn't be out of reason to think that if the players had Vorn and were trying to, get out of their responsibilities, that Wakanga would send someone to go and steal the control amulet back and get it by force. All in all, Vorn is an insanely powerful reward for relatively simple task. But you will see what they have to go through to get control of Vorn in Yellyark. Wreck of the Narwhal. Wreck of the Narwhal is a crashed airship that is now being used by a tribe of veggie pygmies as essentially a base. While the veggie pygmies might not be interesting, it is one of the inhabitants that is there that is interesting. A were-tiger. This were-tiger, however, isn't just any random Chultan. This person's name is Bowai's Otomu, who's actually the cousin of Wakanga Otomu. Uh, this were-tiger has been living out here for quite some time and really doesn't interact with civilization all that much. There's a decent amount of detail here about how Bowai's actually interacts with the party in regards of trading with them or interacting with them, bringing them to the wreck, or stopping them before they get to the wreck. But what's also nice about him is that he is not inherently hostile, and even if he is, him being a were creature does prevent some people from even hurting him in the first place. But more often than not, your players will talk to this guy and discover that he is willing to not only trade for some valuables, but is also willing to give some information on the surrounding area. He will give information on Needle's bones. He will give information on Nangalore. He will give information on both Needle's bones and Nangalore, the surrounding area. If players find themselves invited back to the wreck of the Narwhal and have sticky fingers, they could theoretically find some decent amount of gold here, as there's a sort of gems that are worth 100 gold each, and some healing potions, some spy glasses, and some other things. I will note that spy glasses are a very overlooked thing in D&D. Spyglass, the only mechanical benefit is it lets you see twice as much, which isn't that big of a deal. But Player's Handbook has them as 1,000 gold, so always be wary of that. Other than that, not really too much going on here. He can make it for an interesting character, especially if your friends are on friendly relationships with Wakanga Otomu. But all in all, very, very nice roleplay encounter that if you have a group of murder hobos will end up in a fight with veggie pygmies and a were-tiger. Wreck of the Star Goddess. The Star Goddess is another airship that crashed in the jungles of Chult. However, it is semi-recent, and unfortunately for the crew, they crashed high up in the trees and are out of food in the middle of nowhere and are currently being exhausted to death. This place has earned itself a map, so let's go ahead and dive right into it. All right, time to look at this confusing map. So the wreck of the Star Goddess is now essentially broken into three pieces, with two members of the crew being on one portion and four members of the crew being on another. The crew was surveying Chult when a nasty group of terrafolk came up and popped the balloon, causing them to crash down. Not fun times. The crew is now currently being exhausted and is only able to basically drink water from the rains, and that's about it. The reason why they're in this predicament is a lot of the cargo spilled down to the ground, where unfortunately there's a lot of undead scavengers, a whole bunch of ghouls are residing there, and they are way too weak and way too undermanned to deal with all these ghouls. Also interesting to note, it says that after a couple of minutes of interacting with the people having climbed up into the wreck of the Star Goddess, a group of undead Grillons. Grillon zombies will appear. And unfortunately, these things are terrifying. They will totally jack up all of the crew members if your players do not help out. What's interesting to note here is that it states that the undead Gorillons are actually quite willing to grab people and throw them off of the ship, which for the exhausted and weak people of the crew is kind of terrifying. However, for your players, it really isn't that deathly, as it's only about maybe a 50-foot drop or a 60-foot drop, which by higher levels really actually isn't that much. It's funny how you can fall 200 feet and you only take, 20 d6 damage. Not even that much. Once the players have interacted with these people, fought off the undead, and actually scoured this place, they don't actually discover all that much. There really isn't that much loot to be found here. What is interesting is you have the moral conundrum of what do you do with the survivors. So when all is said and done, with all the undead dealt with, there really isn't that much loot to be found here. However, the moral conundrum is now what do your players do with the survivors? These people are way too weak, and they can't be going out into the jungles by themselves, or else they're going to be in for a bad time. So, what do your players do? Do your players just leave the crew to their own devices? Do they escort them back to civilization? Do the survivors now tag along with the party on their adventures? I've seen this played out in a lot of ways. It really comes down to the game that you're running. If your players already have a decent amount of NPCs tagging along with them in regards to porters and guides and fledgling fighters and stuff, then this is they can just add to the pile. But if you run a game where you don't really have any add-ons, they might cramp your style. Maybe you do say that someone comes along and helps them out. Maybe they stay here after getting some supplies and try and wait for reinforcements. Maybe some other airship is going to come by and pick them up. All in all, the Wreck of the Star Goddess is a very fun combat encounter. It's a good moral dilemma of what your players do with people out in the middle of the jungles. And I would definitely say that this is a memorable one. Wyrmheart Mine. Wyrmheart Mine is the second of the two mines that are fleshed out in this adventure, which, funnily enough, they are rather close together on the map and are, in fact, linked underground. Wyrmheart Mine is currently the home of dozens of kobolds and, most important of all, a red dragon. Depending on what level your players arrive at Wyrmheart Mine, they will be in for a rude awakening, or you may be a generous DM and change some of these stats around on the dragon. Wyrmheart Mine, of course, has a beautiful map to go along with it, so let's go ahead and hop right in. All right. Wyrmheart Mine is not one, not two, but three mini maps for your players to delve in and explore, where they'll be finding themselves going up against kobolds, specters, kobolds, and more kobolds, and a dragon. All right, let's hop right into the nitty gritty of it. Reasons why your players might find themselves at Wyrmheart Mine is if they picked up the guide Hugh Hackingstone. Hugh Hackingstone will actually deceive the party and guide them here no matter where they want to go. Or they might simply see that there's a mine on the map and just want to go over there. What they'll find at Wyrmheart Mine is a decent amount of loot, a decent amount of fighting, some traps, some Indiana Jones cart ride style shenanigans, and a roaring red dragon. So, to start off with, when they find themselves making their way to the front of Wyrmheart Mine, they'll see that there are several sheds outside, which is packed with some mining gear. This place used to be owned and operated by a clan of dwarves. However, that red dragon basically took this place over and killed all the inhabitants, or most of the inhabitants. So areas 1 and 2, the office and the supply shed, they're not going to really find anything major in here other than the fact that they will find, they'll definitely know that this is some type of mining mine. Go figure. However, what the most important thing that they'll find is that in area 3 is an ore cart. This cart can totally be restored and be used to go down the mine. and I've heard plenty of stories of people sliding down all the way to the bottom, having a roaring good time, fighting kobolds dangling out of a cart. Once inside, they can see that this place spirals more than 200 feet down over a set of 3 tiers. The upper shaft is where your players are going to be fighting some kobolds and theoretically some specters. Area 5, the Haunted Forge. So, when the dwarves got killed, some of them were really pissed off, and this leaves them in a spectral form. The kobolds are smart enough not to go into this place as they know it's haunted. However, your players probably won't have that information at hand. So if they find themselves going in here, they will be jumped by specters, and specters are pretty scary no matter what level because draining HP is a big deal. Also important to note though is if they are able to deal with it, they can find a mithril breastplate as a reward. Pretty pretty nice reward. Area 6. This is where their encounters with the kobolds are probably going to be starting, as they will see the kobolds basically keeping watch over things. There is an egg nursery here. There is some kobold inventors, pretty fun stat block. There's a neat little trap that they have going on here, just in case people try and get all uppity. And number 7 here is the upper landing. If your players are keen on visualization, I would recommend revealing the height everywhere because, unfortunately, with a 2D looking map, it's sort of hard to gauge the verticality of this, and you can see even here that it indicates here you're at 250 feet above the ground, you're at 200 feet, you're at 175 feet when you get here. It's spiraling down the whole way, but just because you're looking at this map, it does make this a little bit hard to tell. So in regards to the first floor here, we don't have really too much going on. The specters just keep to the haunted forge. The kobolds just have a little nursery here and are making sure that nobody comes up. And also important to note that these two kobolds here, if they see anything funny, they will run down and start gabbing. The thing to note is that they are only kobolds. They are not going to rely on trying to poke people to death. They are not going to rely on facing the enemy headlong. They are weak, and no matter what level your players approach this place, they are going to be going up against kobolds, which I will say has probably led to the downfall of many people, as you probably get emboldened by the fact that there's only kobolds here. Uh, and this continues until, of course, they meet the Red Dragon. Whether they take the stairs down or ride that minecart all the way, they'll be passing by this second little mini-map here. Area 8 details out that this is another place where they live, and it actually says that there's a decent amount of kobolds here. Like, during the day, there's 66 kobolds. It does state that this place actually does get pretty packed, as during the day there is 66 kobolds, but at night there's only 2d6. So keep that in mind when your players make their assault in. Area 9 is the inventor's quarters, where the smart, tricksy little inventors have made a home for themselves, but nothing too major. One thing your players might pick up on is that there is a distinct lack of loot anywhere, whether they be in the nursery or these little living quarters. There really isn't much here. It actually states that the kobolds basically surrender everything to Tinder, the dragon. All right, Area 10 is it's simply labeled Big Smash. What a name. So what's really cute about this is if your players are in fact going down here by cart, the kobolds will actually spring this trap of having this rock swing down and try and hit the cart. There's a fun little table here saying what happens if they do get hit. They could theoretically get thrown, they could go continue unhindered, but that is a cute little trap and certainly makes this place liven up a bit more. I only wish that there was maybe one or two more of these, as only a one-time attempt to try and throw your players off of a cart seems just a little too low for my liking. All right, Area 11 is the Erd's quarters. Erd is a strange name, and it doesn't even go into any detail of why these things are called Erds, but the Erds here are essentially winged kobolds. It states that the winged kobolds are actually elitist, and they actually refuse to interact with the other kobolds, and they reside closer down here to the bottom, presumably being closer to their master. Winged kobolds aren't anything too much to gawk at. They've only got 7 HP, and they might drop a rock on someone. Area 12, the bottom of the shaft. This is where they're going to finally reach their destination, which is interesting because if they come down here, they'll actually be able to see that the cart continues on, and in fact heads all the way to Harakamar. However, unless your players have, some good insight or been to the other place before, or maybe just a guide telling them, they're not going to know where this card leads. Unfortunately doesn't go into too much detail about what they'll uncover in this mine, other than that there is kobolds and other monsters along the way. Area 13 here is the audience chamber, where if you are coming by foot or even by cart, this is the most likely place where you'll end up, as basically it'll be a small cliff that actually overlooks the dragon's hoard. This is where all the kobolds come to prostrate themselves to Tinder and beseech her kind and powerful words. There's actually a fun little tip here that says that if they are able to make themselves kobold size and don these ceremonial objects that they find in Area 14, they could theoretically fool the red dragon. It's probably not going to happen because not every group has the capability of doing so, and they're probably not going to know to do it in the first place unless they've been interacting with the kobolds in a roleplay manner. But that is interesting to note that they could try and subterfuge their way into a dragon's hoard. All right, last but certainly not least, Tinder's Lair. This is the kid and caboodles. This is the swag. This is all the loot. Where in here they can find, if they haven't been causing too much of a ruckus, a red dragon who is protecting her hoard. She, being only a young red dragon, hasn't grown into absolute primordial evil, and is actually willing to accept a bribe for their very lives if the players are willing to give up a huge amount of gold. So, something to note is that this young red dragon, if she is engaged in combat, she will happily kill anybody. This is not her lair, however, so she doesn't get lair actions, but she will use the terrain to her advantage. She will more than likely run away and wait for her fire breath to recharge, then come back down, melt the players, and repeat process. If your players didn't come prepared, they're probably in for the fight of their lives, as the terrain is not good here. There's a lot of open spots. There's a lot of places for a dragon to retreat to. She has the ability to fly and thus can fly all the way up the mine, whereas your players are going to be relatively slow compared to her. She will be using the terrain to her advantage, and she will be using her minions to her advantage. Fighting this is incredibly deadly. There is very few parties that can actually deal with this if she's ran to her full evil extent. That being said, though, if your players are able to dupe her or able to deal enough damage that she runs away, or just catch the mine when she's not here, they will find a humongous treasure hoard. 3,300 gold, 1,500 silver pieces, etc., blah, blah, blah. But also, very important to note, is a +1 battle axe that lets you float. Not bad, not bad. Funny to note that the weapon's name is Bob. It's not sentient or anything, it's just that's just the name given to it. All in all, Wyrmheart Mine is a amazing dungeon. The verticality of it is very unique. The fact that there's the extremes of kobolds that are incredibly weak and then a dragon that's incredibly strong evens out, surprisingly enough. The fun you can have with the cart is fantastic. The little traps that they have laid out everywhere are fun. The kobold inventors throwing out funny things is absolutely hilarious. And all in all, this is an excellent dungeon that's sadly a little bit out of the way of the normal adventure. I would highly recommend somehow getting your players involved with this somehow if they really need some gold, or if they hired Hugh Hackenstone, or if they have encountered this red dragon before. There's a lot of ways you can somehow prompt your players into going into this place. And whether they deal with the kobolds and the dragon in a roleplay approach, or if they go hacking, there is a lot of great stuff to be had here. I cannot recommend this dungeon enough. Yellyark. Yellyark is the last named location in all of Chapter 2. There's a lot of stuff in Chapter 2, I'm telling you. Yellyark is the location of the goblin tribe that is currently in possession of the control amulet to Vorn. This place has earned itself a beautiful little map and the funniest diagram in this book. So let's go ahead and hop right over to it. All right. So looking at this, you can clearly tell that something's up. They have a whole bunch of little buildings that seem to be on like a tarp or something. It's really hard to tell, and especially because your players are not privy to some of the information here. They actually don't see this. They just see a tree. But in reality, this is actually what's going on here. They can spot that there is basically this tree that's bent over, and as this beautiful little diagram illustrates here, if the mechanism is released, then their village is going to be swooped up and flung. I, I, it's amazing. It really is. It, I, I'm so happy that someone actually came up with the idea for that. All right, so yeah, let's hop into this. So area number one, canoes. So three canoes are pulled up on the bank of the stream. If you actually take a look at the map, there isn't actually a major river here, but it's always implied that throughout Chult there's a whole bunch of little streams and whatnot. You can imagine that they use these canoes for fishing purposes. Area 2 is the larder, and the larder is the area where all the meat is stored, as per that little demonstration there at the top. They leave this here outside because if they are getting attacked, they hopefully the dinosaurs or whatever else make their way to the larder instead. Area 3 is Queen Grabstab's hut. Queen Grabstab is the leader of these folk, and she's actually currently wearing Vorn's control amulet. She doesn't know what it does, but all they see is that there is the name Vorn written on it, and they revere it. Area 4 is the wooden cage. It states that prisoners are held here and are basically held until they're eaten by the goblins. If you, for some reason, your players somehow get into a fight with goblins and lose, then they got other issues going on. But they can find themselves here. I would recommend sticking maybe some, sap that's stuck in here and for them to free. Area 5 is the Anthills. Every tribe of Batiri in Chult is unique. They all wear masks that depict their lives or their tribes. This tribe is named the Biting Ant tribe for a reason. They've basically set up around a series of anthills. It's very interesting. It says that the Batiri are not affected by the ants at all. However, if the players were to walk over them, then swarms of insects will come crawling out and attack them. Area 6 here is the launch mechanism. So, the launch mechanism is obviously just the funniest thing about this little adventure here. It says that there's a pretty hard wisdom perception check to spot this thing. However, if they have proficiency with survival, they'll be able to have advantage on this. Basically, if your players are, smart enough to take a look around and actually spot this thing, they might be able to put two and two together and get the bright idea to fling these goblins. But do they want to do that? Do they want to fling all these goblins that are here? That is the question. If they do, then if Queen Grabstab is actually in that little tarp and she gets flown, then they lose the control amulet, or at least it gets, flown however far away. It actually doesn't say how far the goblin are flown away. It simply says that they are just gone. However, it is extremely deadly, and any goblin that's in there is totally going to die because they take 8d6 bludgeoning damage. Pretty decent amount. Another thing to consider is that these are not all warmongering, evil Batiri just roaming around. There's also children in the tribe as well. So, what do your players do? Do they wait for the prime opportunity and release the mechanism? Do they try and sneak in here and find the control amulet? Do they just go to town and just kill all the goblins? It's really tough to say. I would recommend that if your players do get the bright idea to launch this mechanism, but they haven't exactly figured out where the control amulet is, you might just be generous and have the Queen Grabstab happen to be in the larder at the time, or maybe Queen Grabstab is out on some raid and comes back and sees that her village is gone. All in all, a very cute little encounter here, which can totally be a slog of combat versus dozens of goblins, or it could be one and done. They release the village, all the materia that weren't in the hut chase after it. Uh, Entirely up to you. All right, that's gonna wrap it up for chapter 2. Like I said, chapter 2 is the biggest of all the chapters, as the following chapters are all going to be about individual and specific set pieces. Chapter 2 is absolutely fantastic. There are so many locations, there are so many NPCs to find, there are so many encounters to roll. There is the fun aspect of hex crawling, and then of course once you get tired of the hex crawling, there is just tons and tons of set pieces to go to. My personal recommendations are that you run this game like a hex crawler for a bit, and once they start getting a little bit more powerful, once they hit, the levels 5, 6, 7 range, you probably cut out the hex crawling bits because most things that they'll encounter on the rollable table aren't going to be doing that much to them at that point, and there's more fun things to be doing. And like I previously stated in the beginning, make this your own. Do you want this to be a hardcore survival game? Do you want this just to be a fun set piece game where, it's a flavor of the week with these fun little one shot, two shots of dungeons? Do you want to run it purely as written? I promise you that throughout the course of a single adventure, you're not going to hit everything. There are simply way too many named places for your players to go to, and they probably have better things to do. That is what makes this module so fantastic. As a DM, I'm running this for a third time, and I continue to run into new things. All right, that's going to wrap it up here, but if you have any questions, go ahead and feel free to ask. I love this chapter and can't wait to take a full on dive into the chapters to come. I want to hear the awesome stories that both you and your players have shared, either exploring and hacking their way through the jungles or in one of the many named little locations. There's simply so many awesome things going on here, and I love hearing stories about my favorite module. So that's going to wrap it up for chapter 2. If you want the insight into Omu, then look forward to my next guide on chapter 3, Omu, the Forbidden City. Thank you all for watching, and goodbye.